A barren wasteland stretched across the horizon, where crimson sandstorms howled like dying spectres. This was Oryx 5, a world forsaken by both gods and men. The remnants of human ambition lay buried beneath the dunes, shattered domes, scorched vehicles, bones stripped clean by things unseen. They called them sand wraiths, apex predators that did not hunt for hunger, did not kill for sustenance. They killed because it was their nature, because they wanted to. For years, humanity's expansionist arrogance had met its match here. 5 colonies had been erased as if they had never existed. No distress signals, no survivors, only blood-traced dunes and silent echoes of slaughter. The military classified it as a dead system, an unsalvageable loss. No reinforcements, no rescue operations, just another ghost world on a growing list of places where mankind had dared to step and failed to stand. But now, something was hunting. The hunters. A silhouette moved through the sandstorms, wrapped in a matte black exosuit, its armor seamless as the void itself. The camouflage plating shifted colors like a chameleon, masking its presence against the swirling storm. His name was Elias Ash Carter. To those who knew his past, he was a ghost, a man who had survived where no one should have. The only living, soul to have escaped Colony Carthan before the sand wraiths wiped it from existence. He had seen the slaughter firsthand, felt the weight of a wife and child who never made it past the first scream. That day had shattered him. He had been a soldier. Once, elite exo-warfare division, a warrior forged for off-world combat, trained to kill in environments where man had no right to exist. And yet none of it had mattered when the wraiths came. The weapons failed, the tactics failed, everything failed. Except, for him, they had let him live. Why, for 5 years he had hunted that answer, through the war zones of fallen colonies, through the ruins of civilizations older than Earth itself. He had bled, learned, adapted. He had stood before things that should not have been, that defied reason and logic, and he had survived them all. Now he had returned, not as prey, as a hunter. His HUD flickered, scanning the sandstorm ahead. Heat signatures, movement. There, a distortion in the air, subtle, like a ripple in reality itself. A form hunched low, moving with an inhuman grace that no natural predator should possess. A sand wraith. It had seen him. The winds howled as the thing vanished, its body bending light in a grotesque display of evolutionary perfection. Cloaked in invisibility, it moved closer. It knew the game. Humans relied on their eyes, and against creatures unseen, they were nothing but cattle awaiting slaughter. But Ash had learned. His visor pulsed, and the air around him shifted. Microbursts of ionized dust erupted from his gauntlets, clinging to every surface in a faint glowing mist. An ancient hunter's trick, upgraded with bleeding-edge tech. The sand wraith flickered, its outline betraying it against the dust-filled air. It hesitated. Ash did not. His hypersonic blade ignited with a whisper, too fast for human reflexes, too lethal for any hesitation. It carved through chitin and flesh, severing the wraith's spine in a single, merciless stroke. The creature collapsed, writhing in silent agony. It should have died instantly. Instead, it spoke, not in a language, not in words, but through a burst of static and distortion, its unnatural voice clawing through the comms in Ash's helmet. "You broke the cycle." A whisper, a statement, a warning. Then, silence. Ash stood there, staring at the corpse of the thing that had haunted his nightmares. For years, he had thought of nothing but this moment, killing them, ending them, becoming the force that humanity should have sent in the first place. But something was wrong. Reaching down, his gauntleted fingers pried open the wraith's carapace, exposing the still-glowing implants buried within its flesh, wires, cybernetics, not natural, not primal. Something had engineered them. A chill that had nothing to do with the desert cold crawled through his veins. He had not just killed a beast, he had just destroyed a weapon, and whoever had created these monsters had just realized something horrifying. Humanity had begun to fight back. The storm raged around him, but Ash stood still, the implications slamming into him like a warhead. He had trained for this for years, planned, analyzed, and calculated his every move. But he had been wrong. This was not just about vengeance. This was not just about survival. Something had created the sand wraiths, unleashed them, controlled them. If that was true, then what happened on Carthan was not an act of nature. It was a test, and if humanity had been the test subject, then what came next would be the real war. The corpse of the sand wraith lay twisted in the blood-stained sand, its lifeless husk twitching as if resisting death itself. The cybernetics embedded deep within its flesh pulsed, faintly feeding signals to a distant, unseen presence. Ash's breath was steady, but his mind was in turmoil. This wasn't just a monster. It wasn't just a mindless predator. Someone had made this, and now they knew he was here. The first response. It came fast. Ash felt it before he saw it. His motion sensors flared, detecting movement across a wide radius. Multiple sources, too many. The dunes around him shifted, as if the sands themselves were coming alive. Not alive. Hunting the wraith he had just killed had been a scout. The others had already been closing in. A voice crackled over his comms, distorted, unnatural, an intelligence wrapped in static. Human. You have broken the pattern. Ash's fingers tightened around his blade, but he didn't respond. The voice wasn't asking for conversation. It was confirming a death sentence. The first sand wraith lunged from the mist, its form momentarily visible as the dust illuminated its jagged exoskeleton. Ash's body moved on instinct, sidestepping before slamming his knee into its ribcage with bone-cracking force. The creature snarled, jaws unhinging with a sickening snap. But before it could recover, Ash's sidearm barked, sending superheated plasma rounds searing through its skull. One down, 6 more incoming. They came in a whirlwind of claws and shifting light, phasing in and out of sight as they encircled him. Ash had spent 5 years training for this, and now every hard-won second was about to be tested. He dove backward, rolling into the sand as a wraith slashed where his throat had been moments before. Another lunged from behind, but his enhanced reflexes let him snap his elbow into its jaw, then slam his blade through its chest before it could vanish again. He barely had time to react before the next pounced from above, using the storm to mask its descent, but Ash wasn't unprepared. With a flick of his wrist, he activated his exo-gauntlet, unleashing a detonation pulse that sent the wraith flying back, its cloak flickering as it tumbled across the sand. Before it could recover, a single plasma round found its skull, ending its hunt forever. His HUD flashed red. They were adapting. The remaining 3 were circling slower now, studying his movements, calculating. They weren't just reacting. They were learning, and then, as if responding to an unheard command, they retreated, not in panic. In strategy, silence. Ash remained still, waiting, analyzing. Every fiber of his body told him this wasn't over. He had been outnumbered, yet the wraiths had chosen not to overwhelm him. They weren't afraid. They had something worse. A new presence entered the battlefield. At first, it was nothing but a shifting shadow in the storm, but then Ash's suit sensors spiked off the charts. Not organic, not entirely. And then he saw it, a sand wraith, twice the size of the others, its form reinforced with thick metallic plating, neural implants glowing beneath its chitin. A hybrid, the next stage of whatever controlled them. It stepped forward deliberately, not lunging like the others. Not mindless. It knew exactly what it was doing, and in its outstretched hand it held something impossible. A human skull. A fresh one. The realization hit Ash with the weight of a warship. Someone else had been here recently. Another hunter? A survivor? Or worse? Warning! The massive wraith tilted its head, observing him in return. Its claws tightened around the skull, crushing it into dust. A silent message: turn back, or be next. Ash didn't move. The storm howled around them, but in that moment only two things existed in the universe: the lone human warrior and the nightmare that was no longer just a beast. And then, for the first time, the hybrid wraith spoke. Not through comm interference, not through static with its own voice, a low, unnatural growl, a mix of metal and something terribly alive. Run! Ash fired first. His rifle screamed, unloading an entire magazine in half a second, blue-hot plasma rounds, slamming into the wraith's reinforced plating. Sparks burst from impact zones, but the creature didn't flinch. It moved faster than something that size should, closing the gap before Ash could reload. A massive clawed hand struck out, colliding with Ash's armor, sending him skidding backward through the sand, his HUD flickering from the impact. He had barely regained his footing before the wraith was on him again, its blade-like appendages slicing through the air with inhuman precision. Ash barely dodged, rolling under the strike and activating his gauntlet's energy blade in the same motion. He slashed upward, aiming for its exposed throat, but the wraith anticipated the move, twisting unnaturally to avoid. This thing wasn't just hunting him, it was playing with him. The fight was brutal, relentless, a battle of instinct versus calculation. Ash knew how to fight monsters. He had trained his entire existence for this moment. But this was different. This thing thought. It was faster, stronger, and it was holding back, and that terrified him more than anything. A test, that's what this was. Whoever controlled the wraiths, whoever had engineered them, wanted to see what he could do. And the moment Ash realized that, he knew one simple truth: he was being watched. Somewhere, someone was observing this fight, analyzing his every move, his every decision. They had sent this thing not to kill him immediately, but to see if he was worth more than just another corpse in the sand. But Ash wasn't here to prove himself to anyone. He was here to kill. A split-second opening. The wraith lunged, committing to a finishing strike. Too slow. Ash twisted into the attack, using its momentum against it. A counter-grapple, a brutal twist, and then the kill shot. His blade found the gap in its armor, sliding deep into the base of its skull. The wraith stiffened, claws trembling, then fell silent. Ash wrenched his blade free, letting the corpse fall at his feet. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. The voice returned, cold, mechanical, watching, impressive. A pulse ran through the air. Ash's HUD glitched, red warnings flashing as a new signal hijacked his systems, a new frequency, not interference, a direct transmission, and then coordinates appeared on his screen, a location, an invitation, or a trap. For the first time since stepping onto this cursed planet, Ash felt something new in his bones. Not just rage, not just vengeance. Something worse, something deeper. The hunt had turned, and now they were coming for him. The storm raged on, but Ash stood in its eye, still unshaken, watching the coordinates that now burned on his HUD. An invitation, a challenge, a death sentence. He had come to Oryx 5 to hunt, to kill, to end the nightmare that had taken everything from him. But the truth was unraveling faster than he could grasp. He wasn't fighting mindless monsters. He wasn't fighting apex predators. He was fighting something far worse, a force that watched from the shadows, guiding the sand wraiths like pieces on a game board. A force that had just deemed him worthy of attention, and Ash Carter didn't know whether to feel honored or doomed. The coordinates led deep into the bone dunes, an expanse of jagged crystalline formations that jutted from the sand like the ribcage of a dead god. No human had set foot here before. No one who did had ever returned. Ash moved through the wasteland like a phantom, his exosuit shifting with the light, blending into the ever-moving dunes. His rifle was primed, his blade coated in residual wraith blood, his mind honed into a single, unbreakable objective. Find the source, kill it, burn everything down. But as he approached the coordinates, something changed. The air thickened, like an invisible force pressing against his armor. His HUD glitched, flickering erratically, as if reality itself was protesting his arrival. Then movement. Not wraiths. Something else. From the dunes emerged a figure, draped in a worn, sand-swept cloak, its face obscured by a crude rebreather mask. Human, Ash's rifle snapped up, targeting the stranger before they could make a move. But they didn't attack. Instead, they raised their hands slowly, stepping forward with deliberate caution. Then, in a voice hoarse from years of desert air, "You're real." The words hit Ash harder than a plasma round. Survivors. He hadn't expected survivors. Her name was Dr. Kaylin Voss, a former xenobiologist from the doomed Carthan colony. She had been here since the beginning, and she knew the truth. The sand wraiths hadn't always been like this. They weren't born as killers. They were made, not by evolution, not by nature, by the celestial dominion, a corporate war machine that had long operated in the shadows, manipulating the expansion of human colonies. For its own ends, they had engineered bioweapons, crafted from ancient alien species, creatures whose intelligence had once rivaled mankind's, until they had been twisted into tools of slaughter. The Wraiths had been the perfect test subjects, and Oryx 5 had been their proving ground, a silent war waged without human knowledge. A test bed where celestial dominion could perfect its latest weapons, studying how humanity reacted, or rather, how it died. Until he broke the cycle. Voss led Ash deeper into the bone dunes, into the ruins of an abandoned research facility, half buried beneath the sand. This was where it had all begun. He saw it in the shattered terminals, in the glass tubes filled with long-dead wraith embryos, in the bloodstains left behind by those who had realized too late what they had created. The wraiths had not been the first experiment. They had been the latest, and they weren't the only ones left. Deep in the facility, past corridors that reeked of rust and decay, Ash saw something worse. Suspended in cryopods, still alive, still breathing. Hybrids, the next generation of wraiths. Cybernetic enhancements fused with chitinous armor. Neural interfaces directly linked to a hive mind core, pulsing with unnatural light. This was what was coming next. An army. Not just predators, but commandable weapons, perfectly designed for slaughter, for war. And Ash realized, with a slow, sinking horror, celestial dominion hadn't lost control. This had been the plan all along. The revelation burned through him, all of it. Carthan, the massacres, the silence from the colonies. They hadn't just been abandoned, they had been erased. Celestial dominion wanted no survivors, no witnesses, no proof. But Ash was proof, and he had just dug too deep. A low hum vibrated through the facility. A signal, Call Ash's HUD lit up with enemy markers. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The Wraiths were coming. They had found him, and this time they wouldn't be playing. Ash turned to Voss, his mind racing. There was no running, no escape, only one option. Burn it all. He moved fast, planting detonation charges along the facilities. Core, targeting the databanks, the labs, the cryopods. Voss hesitated. There are still things we can learn from... No! Ash's voice was final. This place wasn't a lab. It wasn't knowledge. It was a graveyard, waiting to be filled. The first wraiths hit like a storm, pouring through the facility's broken walls in waves of chitin and shadow. Ash moved like a machine, his rifle barking, his blade carving through. Flesh and steel alike. Voss wasn't a soldier, but she fought like someone who had spent years surviving hell, but they were outnumbered. The wraiths were adapting, countering every move. They weren't hunting, they were eliminating. The charges were armed. 60 seconds. The hybrid wraith returned, but it wasn't alone. It stood at the forefront of a new pack, a force that should not have existed. Wraiths wearing the sigils of celestial dominion, reinforced with combat armor not of their own design. The wraiths had always been monsters, but now they were soldiers, and the Dominion wasn't hiding anymore. They had sent their own creation to finish the job. 30 seconds, Ash and Voss fought for every inch, retreating toward the collapsing exit. A clawed hand tore into Ash's shoulder, dragging him back. The hybrid wraith loomed over him, its voice a distorted echo of something once human. You cannot stop the future. Ash's blade ignited, driving deep into its chest. Neither can you, he twisted, severing the hybrid's neural core, watching as it spasmed, before plunging a detonator into its corpse. 5 seconds. He grabbed Voss and ran. The world erupted. In fire, the bone dunes trembled, the force of the explosion splitting the ground apart, sending shockwaves across the landscape. The facility collapsed, burying the past beneath miles of sand and flame. The wraiths were still out there, celestial dominion was still watching, but the first shot had been fired, and Elias Carter had just declared war. The sandstorm howled as flames consumed the ruins of the facility, black smoke twisting into the sky like the dying breath of a monster. But the war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Ash staggered to his feet, his armor scorched, his left arm bleeding where the wraith's claws had torn through his exosuit. His breath was ragged, but his mind was sharp. There was no time for pain. Voss was beside him, coughing, shaking but alive. Behind them, the bone dunes collapsed inward, swallowing the last remains of Celestial Dominion's hidden laboratory. The explosion had done its job. All research, all records, all living test subjects had been erased. But it wasn't enough, because Celestial Dominion wasn't watching anymore. It was acting. A tremor ran through the sand. The shadows shifted, not wraiths. Something bigger. Ash's HUD flickered as new enemy signatures emerged, closing in from all sides. Not organic life forms, not just sand wraiths, human-built war machines. A low mechanical drone reverberated through the air, accompanied by a voice. Far too controlled to be real. You should have accepted the inevitable. The Dominion had arrived. They came in black dropships, descending through the storm like birds of prey. Elite combat units, clad in obsidian armor, their visors pulsing with crimson light, not just soldiers. Enforcers, the kind Celestial Dominion only sent when a problem needed permanent removal. Their weapons hummed with charged energy rounds, their movements too precise, too rehearsed. AI. Assisted combat protocols. They weren't here to capture. They were here to eliminate. Ash pulled Voss behind cover just as the first plasma rounds tore through the sand, carving deep molten trenches where they had been standing moments before. He knew the odds, 2 against an army, but he'd never given a damn about odds. The fight exploded into chaos. Ash moved like a shadow, his rifle barking, each shot landing between visors, into weak points, into throats. The Dominion soldiers were enhanced, but they weren't invincible. They were still human underneath all that armor, and Ash had spent his life perfecting the art of killing humans. Voss took cover behind a broken ridge, hacking into her stolen Dominion datapad. I can disrupt their targeting systems, but I need time. Time was the one thing they didn't have. The soldiers closed in, using tactical formations, herding Ash and Voss toward the open dunes, where the sand wraiths still lurked. A perfect trap. But Ash Carter didn't do traps. He made them. The wraiths were waiting in the dunes, watching, calculating, not attacking the Dominion soldiers, not moving at all. Ash saw it immediately. The shift in control. The wraiths had never retreated before. never held back unless someone had overridden their natural instincts, unless they had been given new orders. His jaw clenched. Celestial dominion had done it. They had perfected it. The wraiths weren't just monsters anymore. They were weapons, and now they were aimed at him. "Kill the human!" The command rippled through the air, unnatural, synthetic. The wraiths obeyed. They came like a living wave, breaking across the dunes, leaping toward Ash with claws bared and teeth snapping. Ash ran, not away, toward them. His blade ignited mid-stride, a streak of white-hot plasma that cut through the first wraith's skull in a single motion. He fired point-blank into another's chest, then twisted, using the momentum to drive his boot into a third's throat, snapping it with a sickening crunch. But for every one that fell, 3 more took its place. They were endless. And this time, they weren't just hunting, they were following orders. From the ridge, Voss screamed. A Dominion soldier had flanked her, weapon raised. Ash didn't hesitate. One precise throw, and his blade buried itself in the soldier's visor, straight through his skull. But the distraction cost him. A wraith's claws raked across his back, sending him crashing into the sand. His HUD glitched, systems failing, his vision blurred. He felt the next strike coming. He wouldn't be able to dodge. The wraith leaped, then stopped. A second tremor rumbled through the sand. The wraiths hesitated, their heads snapping upward, as if hearing something beyond human perception. Then the Dominion soldiers hesitated too. Their visors flickered. Their movements stalled. The entire battlefield froze. A new signal hijacked the comms. Deeper, older, not Dominion, not human. Something else, something beneath the sand. The ground cracked open, and from the depths of Oryx 5, something rose. Not a wraith, not a machine, something far older than both. A colossal structure, buried for centuries, now breaking free of the Earth's grip. An ancient alien construct, its surface covered in symbols older than Earth itself. And at its core, a hive-mind pulse, radiating across the battlefield. Not wraith tech, not Dominions. Work, something before them all, something that had been waiting. Ash felt it like a whisper in his skull. Not words, not speech. Pure thought. A question. A test. A choice. The wraiths turned toward him, waiting. The Dominion soldiers staggered, their AI systems failing. The war had stopped, and Ash Carter had just become the deciding factor in a conflict older than humanity itself. 3 choices. Destroy the construct, severing all control, leaving the wraiths free. To decide their own fate, override the Dominion's programming, turning the wraiths into humanity's greatest weapon, leave it untouched, and let whatever intelligence lay within decide who was worthy of survival. There was no right answer. No guarantee. Only the choice. And whatever he did next would change the future of the galaxy forever. The world stood still. The battlefield, once a storm of death and fury, was now frozen in eerie silence. The sand wraiths had stopped their assault, their glowing eyes fixed on him. The Dominion soldiers stood paralyzed, their combat AIs scrambled by the unseen force emanating from the ancient structure. And in the center of it all, Ash Carter stood. Before a choice that would determine the fate of more than just this planet, more than just humanity. The construct pulsed. A signal rippled through the air, not sound, not words, but something deeper. Something that resonated in the bones. A demand. Choose. Ash's mind raced. Every possible outcome burned through his thoughts like wildfire. Destroy it. The wraiths would be free, their hive mind no longer shackled to Dominion control. But that didn't mean they'd stop killing. It didn't mean they wouldn't turn on humanity anyway. Could he take that risk? Control it? Override Dominion's programming? Turn the wraiths into humanity's weapon? They would become the ultimate biological war machine, an unstoppable force that would bow to no one but him. But was he any better than the monsters who had created them if he did that? Do nothing, walk away, leave the construct intact, let whatever ancient intelligence still slumbered within decide who was worthy to exist. But that meant surrendering humanity's fate to an entity he didn't understand. No perfect answer, only consequence. Behind him, Voss's voice broke through the silence. Ash, whatever this thing is, it's beyond us. We weren't meant to make this choice. But there was no one else left to make it. He had started this fight. Now he had to end it. Ash clenched his jaw, staring up at the construct, feeling the pulse of something old, something waiting, and then he made his choice. He raised his rifle and fired. Not at the construct, at the Dominion soldiers. The first plasma round took the closest one in the throat, dropping him instantly. The second hit another in the visor, sending him crashing into the sand. The rest of the soldiers snapped back to life, their paralysis breaking as Ash's defiance shattered the fragile peace. Voss gasped. "Ash, what the hell are you doing?" But he knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't freeing the wraiths. He wasn't controlling them. He was giving them a target. The moment the first Dominion soldier fired back, the sand wraiths reacted. Their hive minds screamed, the pulse of the construct surging through them as centuries of instinct reawakened. They were never meant to be slaves. They were never meant to be weapons. They were apex predators. And now they were angry. The sand wraiths rushed forward, their bodies shifting from shadows into solid forms, their claws tearing through the Dominion forces like paper. Ash watched as the war flipped in an instant. The hunters had become the hunted. The Dominion enforcers, trained killers, enhanced soldiers, none of it mattered now. They had thought they were in control. They had thought they could use monsters to win wars, but monsters don't obey forever. Voss stared in horror as the battlefield became a massacre. "Ash, what have you done?" He didn't answer, because he didn't know if he had saved humanity or doomed it. The last Dominion soldier tried to flee, sprinting for the evac beacon. A wraith pounced, dragging him to the ground. Screams. Then silence. Ash exhaled, his grip on his rifle loosening. It was over. The wraiths had no more targets, and now they turned back toward him, waiting, watching, not as enemies, not as slaves, but as something else entirely. The construct's pulse slowed, its glow fading. It had wanted a choice, and Ash had given it one. Now the future belonged to whoever survived it. Voss shook her head, voice barely a whisper. "You let them live. You let them choose. What happens now?" Ash looked at the wraiths one last time. One of them, a hybrid, reinforced with Dominion tech, stepped forward. It did not attack. It simply nodded. Then, without a sound, the wraiths vanished into the dunes, free, for the first time in centuries, and Ash Carter knew, deep in his bones, he hadn't ended a war. He had just started the next one. The desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky still tainted by the smoke of battle. The dunes had been drenched in blood, but now silence reigned. No Dominion forces remained, no war machines prowled, no voices screamed for mercy, only shadows shifting beneath the sand. The sand wraiths were gone, but not forgotten. Ash Carter stood on the edge of a broken world, watching the last embers of the war flicker out. His rifle felt heavier than before. The weight of what he had done, what he had unleashed, pressed against his soul like an anchor. Voss stood beside him, staring out at the ruins of the Dominion's operation. The wind carried whispers of a galaxy that would soon wake to a new reality. "You didn't save us." She wasn't accusing him. She was stating a fact. Ash nodded. "I know." He hadn't saved anyone. He had simply let the monsters choose their own fate. Now the question was, what would they do with it? A transmission crackled through his damaged comms. An unknown frequency, not Dominion, not human, something else, a warning or an invitation. Ash activated the signal. A distorted voice, low, ancient, and crawling with something not quite organic, filled The silence, the cycle is broken. A pause. Now we see what comes next. He didn't know if the sand wraiths would turn against humanity. He didn't know if celestial dominion would accept their defeat, or if they had simply moved to the next phase of their war. He didn't know if whatever lay buried beneath Oryx 5 had truly gone back to sleep, or if it had just started to wake up. But he knew one thing: they would all come for him. Dominion, the wraiths, the unseen forces that had pulled the strings long before he set foot on this planet. And if they thought he would run, if they thought he would fall like every other failed colony, they were dead wrong. Ash Carter had been the first human to hunt the wraiths. He wouldn't be the last. And when the next war came, he would be ready.